I never imagined that a single locked door could haunt me more than death itself. The day my husband first mentioned that house, his voice carried a warning I didn't understand. "Never go there, Helena," he said, his eyes sharper than I had ever seen them. "Promise me you will never try to enter it, not now, not ever." I thought he was joking at first, maybe being dramatic or teasing me the way he sometimes did when he wanted to make ordinary things sound mysterious. But he wasn't smiling. His tone was cold, almost fearful, and it sent a chill through me that I couldn't explain back then. We had been married for 16 years when he first mentioned the house. His name was Christopher Hale, a man everyone respected, admired, and envied. To the world he was charming, successful, and generous. To me he was distant, secretive, and full of unanswered silences. Our marriage had started like a dream, flowers, promises, late-night confessions, and whispered plans about the future. But over time secrets replaced closeness. He traveled often, stayed out late, and took phone calls in rooms where I wasn't allowed to enter. But I stayed, partly because I loved him and partly because he made sure I never had a reason strong enough to leave. The house he warned me about wasn't far away. It stood on the outskirts of town, surrounded by old iron gates and covered in vines like it wanted to be forgotten. I had only seen it twice from a distance, but the sight of it always filled me with unease, tall, silent, and hidden behind dark trees as if it were holding its breath. He told me he used it for work matters, and that he kept things there that weren't meant for me to see. At the time I tried not to think too much about it. Every marriage has its unexplained corners, I told myself. Every person has their secrets. But then he died. It was sudden, cruel, and left me breathless. A car accident on a stormy night. A truck skidding on wet roads, twisted metal and shattered glass. They said he died instantly, that he didn't feel pain, but I didn't believe them. I could feel his absence like a scream. He was gone, leaving behind a house full of expensive furniture, empty speeches, and a wife with too many questions. Grief is strange. It doesn't knock before entering. It moves in and rearranges everything you thought you understood. For days I couldn't eat, sleep, or think properly. I walked through our home like a ghost, touching his clothes, listening for footsteps that would never return. 3 days after the funeral, his lawyer called me and said there were documents I needed to collect. The will, legal formalities, transfer of assets, the usual things people talk about when someone dies. I sat in his office, numb, signing papers I didn't care to read. Then he mentioned the house. "There's a property under his name that wasn't listed with the others," the lawyer said, adjusting his glasses. "It was privately registered, separately insured, and he left instructions that you are now the sole owner." The words washed over me slowly, like cold water. I knew exactly which house he meant. The one I was never allowed to enter. The one with vines crawling over its windows like nature wanted to bury its existence. I didn't speak. I didn't tell the lawyer that I had never stepped foot inside it. I didn't tell him my husband had forbidden me from even approaching it. I just nodded and listened as he handed me a brass key wrapped in white paper. "Everything in that house now belongs to you," he said. I stared at the key for a long time without touching it. That night I couldn't sleep. His warning echoed in my head like a curse. "Never go there, Helena. Never." But why? What could he possibly have hidden so carefully that even his wife wasn't allowed to know? The curiosity was no longer a quiet whisper in the back of my mind. It was a pounding drum in my chest. Grief loosens restraint. When someone dies, the lies sink or float to the surface, and I was done being left in the dark. The next morning I drove to the house. The road was quiet, lined with bare trees swaying in the early winter wind. My heart beat like it wanted to break through my ribs. The gates were still there, rusted, heavy, and locked with a thick chain that looked older than our marriage. The brass key fit the lock on the gate too, as if the entire place had been waiting for me all along. The hinges groaned when I pushed the gate open, the sound echoing in the empty air. The house stood silent and motionless. Its windows were dark, its paint peeling, and its roof covered in moss. It didn't look abandoned, but it didn't look alive either. I hesitated at the front door, my fingers trembling as they touched the key. For a moment I could almost hear his voice behind me, whispering that I didn't want to know what was inside. But he was gone, and all that remained was the truth he tried so hard to bury. I took a deep breath, turned the key in the lock, and pushed the door open. What I saw inside didn't just shock me. It shattered everything I ever believed about my husband, my marriage, and the life I thought I was living. The air inside was colder than outside, still and untouched, as if the walls had been holding their breath for years. The first thing that hit me was the smell. A faint mix of dust, old wood, and something floral beneath it, maybe perfume that lingered long after footsteps were gone. Light slipped through narrow gaps in the curtains, casting long, thin stripes across the floorboards. I stepped in slowly, my fingers brushing against the wall, as if I needed to feel something solid to steady myself. The entrance opened into a hallway lined with framed pictures, but the faces were turned away. Literally. Every photograph was positioned backward against the wall, hiding whoever was in them. I walked past them with a growing knot in my stomach. The house was fully furnished, chairs, shelves, lamps, rugs, all carefully placed, untouched by time or intrusion. It didn't feel abandoned. It felt suspended. To my left was a sitting room with velvet armchairs and a marble coffee table. A crystal decanter sat on a silver tray, half filled with whiskey. 2 glasses rested beside it, one with dried remnants of liquid at the bottom. Someone had been here. Maybe not recently, but not decades ago either. I could picture him here, my husband, pouring a drink in silence. But was he alone? I moved deeper into the house, my footsteps cautious. Every object seemed to be waiting for someone to return. A book lay open on a side table, a bookmark made of ribbon placed gently across the spine. I leaned forward to see the title. It was a romance novel, something he never read. The bookmark held a page where a woman's name was written in pencil along the margin. The handwriting was his. My hands grew cold. I wanted to call someone, to tell someone where I was, what I was seeing, but I didn't even know what I would say. How do you explain that you're walking through a life your husband built in secret? That the man who promised you his world had another one hidden like a second heartbeat? In the next room there was a dining table with 4 chairs, all neatly placed. A vase at the center held dried roses that must once have been red. Their petals were dark and fragile. I closed my hand around the back of one chair, a strange dizziness rising in me. Had he eaten here? Had he laughed here? With who? I found the kitchen next, and that's when I stopped breathing for a moment. The counter held 2 mugs, one with lipstick smeared along the rim. A dish towel was slung over the sink. The refrigerator wasn't empty. There were wine bottles, sealed jars, even frozen food in the freezer. Not ancient supplies, recent ones. 2 months old at most, maybe less. My grief collided with something sharper. Betrayal. I backed away from the kitchen, holding the wall as I moved down the hallway toward the staircase. Every step I took made the house feel louder, even though it was silent. My pulse was a drumbeat in my ears. I climbed the stairs slowly, my hand trailing along the wooden rail polished smooth with use. At the top of the stairs were 3 closed doors. I don't know why, but I opened the one farthest to the right first. It was a bedroom, and not just any bedroom. The bed was made with cream sheets, a knitted throw folded at the foot of it. There were candles on the nightstand and a woman's scarf draped over a chair by the window. My chest tightened as I walked in. On the dresser were perfume bottles, hairpins, and a silver bracelet shaped like ivy. None of it was mine. And yet, everything was placed with care, as though someone fully intended to return. I swallowed hard and looked around for any trace of him. That's when I saw it, on the nightstand drawer, a photograph in a small frame turned face down like the others downstairs. My fingers hesitated before touching it, but I needed to see. I picked it up and turned it around. I nearly dropped it. It was him, Christopher, standing beside a woman with long auburn hair, her head resting on his shoulder. They were smiling like 2 people in love, and behind them was this very room. No date written, no explanation, just their happiness frozen in silence. My throat burned as the truth crawled through my mind, seeking space among memories that no longer made sense. I placed the photo back down, face up this time. I felt anger, grief, shock, and something like nausea twisting inside me all at once. Was she still alive? Did she know he was dead? Did she mourn him somewhere, unaware that his wife was standing inside their secret life? I forced myself to move, to keep breathing, to keep looking. The second door opened into a smaller room. An office, maybe. A desk, a chair, stacks of papers loose and filed. I scanned the room, noticing a locked drawer right away. The key I had was for the house, not the furniture. Still, I tried it, it didn't fit. I would come back later, I told myself. If this house had answers, that drawer held some of them. Then I opened the third door, and the moment I stepped inside, I understood why the air downstairs had felt like a warning, not a welcome. Because this room did not belong to another woman. It belonged to a child. The sight of the room struck me like a blow I couldn't brace for. It was small, softly lit by a lamp shaped like a moon, and every inch of it told a story I had never been invited to hear. There was a little bed with pale yellow sheets patterned with stars and clouds, a shelf filled with stuffed animals, and a tiny dresser with pastel drawers. On the floor lay a wooden train set in the shape of a loop, the cars carefully connected as if waiting for small hands to pull them along. My breath caught in my throat, shallow and uneven. I walked in slowly, afraid to touch anything, as though the room might shatter under the weight of my presence. On the dresser sat a framed photograph, this one facing forward. It showed a little boy, maybe 3 or 4 years old, sitting on Christopher's lap. The child had soft brown curls and deep hazel eyes. My husband was smiling, holding the boy close. He looked proud. The kind of proud I had once imagined he would be if we'd ever had a child of our own. My knees weakened and I steadied myself against the edge of the dresser. There was no mistaking it. The boy looked like him. He had Christopher's mouth, his dimples, even the same arch in his eyebrows. My husband had a son he never told me about. And if the boy existed, then the woman in the bedroom, the one with auburn hair and love in her eyes, she must be his mother. The betrayal wasn't just a wound. It was an amputation of everything I believed my life had been built on. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the walls. Above the headboard were hand-painted constellations with tiny golden stars, the kind a father might help his child name. How long had this been happening? How many nights had he stayed here instead of at work trips and late meetings? How many lies had I swallowed with a smile? It wasn't until I saw the child's name that I felt my heart break in a way I hadn't believed was still possible. A piece of paper was taped to the wall above a small desk. Letters written carefully with crayon spelled out, Oliver. Under it, a drawing of 3 figures, 2 tall, 1 small, holding hands in front of a house with a red door. This very house. Hot tears burned in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I didn't want to cry for him. Not for the man he pretended to be. I stood and forced myself to keep walking, to keep searching. Answers were scattered everywhere, and I was going to gather every one of them. I left the boys' room and returned downstairs, my steps slower now, more deliberate. Every piece of furniture, every framed photograph turned to the wall, every scented candle, every teacup, they weren't random. They were parts of a life built parallel to mine. One that had laughter, secrets, and Sunday mornings. The house didn't feel abandoned because it hadn't been. It had simply paused, waiting for someone to open the door. I wondered if the woman had a key too. I wondered if she had stood in my place after hearing about his death, or if she was still waiting somewhere, believing he would walk back through a door that now belonged only to ghosts. I made my way back to the office upstairs. The locked drawer tugged at me like a whisper. I searched the room for a key, checked under papers, rifled through envelopes, opened the lower drawers. Nothing. Then my eyes drifted to a coat hanging behind the door. I reached into the pockets and felt something small and metallic. A key. My fingers trembled as I returned to the desk and tried it. The lock clicked with a sound far too soft for the chaos it unleashed inside me. Inside the drawer were several documents neatly arranged. Birth certificates, bank statements, insurance papers, and letters. Dozens of envelopes with my husband's handwriting on them. Some sealed, some opened. I pulled out the birth certificate first, my eyes scanning the page with dread crawling under my skin. Oliver James Hale. Father Christopher Hale. Mother Elizabeth Warren. Elizabeth. The auburn-haired woman. The one in the photograph. The name hit me like a cold wave, but I kept going because I had to know how deep the deception ran. There were financial transfers to her dating back 7 years. 7. That meant the affair, or whatever you want to call the second life he had, began 9 years into our marriage. It meant birthdays, anniversaries, holidays, all those vanished nights had been spent here with them. Then something else caught my eye. There was another envelope beneath the documents, larger and heavier than the rest. My name was written on it in his handwriting. Not Helena, the wife he lived with, but Helena, the woman he lied to. I froze, the envelope clutched in my hand. unsure whether to open it or burn it. But before anything else, I needed to understand why this house remained untouched. Why no one else had come for it. Why his lawyer handed me the key as if I were the only heir of his secrets. Because something about all this felt unfinished. And part of me feared the worst, that I wasn't the only one who didn't know he was dead. I held the envelope for a long moment, my thumb brushing across the letters of my name, as if the texture alone could explain why it existed. His handwriting was steady, as always, not rushed or messy like someone writing in panic. He had planned for me to find this. That realization made my stomach tighten, not with sorrow, but with a cold, sharp anger that began to replace the numbness. I didn't open it yet. I couldn't. Not when there were still corners of the house left unexplored. Not when I didn't know if someone else might walk through the front door at any moment. I slipped the envelope into my coat pocket, the weight of it pressing against my chest like a heartbeat that wasn't mine. I left the office and moved back downstairs, my steps quieter now as if I were trespassing in a story not meant for me. The house felt different after what I'd found, smaller somehow and full of echoes that hadn't been mine to hear. As I passed the kitchen again, my eyes landed on something I had missed before. A child's cereal bowl in the sink, the spoon still inside it. Dried milk clung to the edges. Who cleaned up after him? Who read him to sleep? Who kissed his forehead goodnight? In the living room, I noticed a woven basket near the armchair. Inside were children's books, coloring pages, and a pair of tiny sneakers with Velcro straps. I knelt and touched one of the shoes, barely larger than my palm. A memory flashed in my mind years ago when I told Christopher I wanted children, and he said it wasn't the right time. He said his work was too demanding, that we should wait. I believed him. I waited. And while I was waiting, he was building a life somewhere else. I stood up and walked to the hallway where the backward photographs still lined the wall. One by one, I began turning them over. My fingers shook as each frame revealed a moment I had never witnessed, a timeline I had never been invited into. In one picture, the woman, Elizabeth, was sitting on a picnic blanket, Oliver curled in her lap, laughing. In another, Christopher held the boy up on his shoulders, pointing at something in the distance with a smile so genuine it made my chest ache. There were photos of holidays, birthdays, and quiet mornings. A Christmas tree behind them in one, balloons in another, candles on a cake with 3 little flames. And then the one that made me sit down on the floor because my legs refused to hold me anymore. A photo of the 3 of them together. Christopher, Elizabeth, and Oliver. Standing in front of this house, their arms linked like a family I never knew existed. I don't know how long I sat there. Minutes, maybe. Or an hour. Time didn't matter in that moment. What mattered was the sound of the world shifting beneath my feet. The slow crumble of 16 years of lies disguised as love. Eventually, I stood and made my way to the door at the end of the hallway. It was closed, painted the same pale color as the walls. I turned the knob and pushed it open. It was a storage room smaller than the others, but it held things that didn't belong here. Or maybe they did, and I was the one who didn't. Boxes stacked neatly against the wall, each labeled in his handwriting. Some marked winter clothes, others marked documents, and one that simply said miscellaneous. Curiosity tugged at me, relentless now. I opened the first box. Inside were women's coats and scarves, none of which I recognized. The next box held toys, puzzles, plastic cars, stuffed animals still soft as if they were used just weeks ago. Then at the bottom of the stack, a small unmarked box caught my attention. It was lighter than the others, and when I lifted the lid, I forgot how to breathe. Inside were items that belonged to me. A bracelet my mother gave me when I turned 21. A silk hairband I lost years ago and assumed I had misplaced. A photograph of me and Christopher from our first anniversary, the edges worn from time. Why were these things here? Why would he take them? Hide them? I picked up the bracelet and held it in my palm. Had he intended to show someone? Had he kept them as mementos of the life he left half-lived? Or were they trophies of his deception? My mind spun with questions, but beneath the shock, another thought crept in, one I tried to suppress. What if Elizabeth didn't know about me either? The idea unsettled me more than I expected. Had she built her life on lies too? Or had she been part of the deception knowingly? I didn't know which possibility hurt more. My phone buzzed in my pocket, startling me. I pulled it out, expecting a wrong number or a spam call. but seeing the name on the screen made my heart twist painfully. It was his sister, Mara. I hesitated, then answered. Helena, she said softly, her voice tentative. There's something we need to talk about. The room around me seemed to narrow. My grip tightened on the bracelet as if it could anchor me to something real. I'm listening, I said, my voice barely steady. She hesitated briefly, then spoke the words that made my blood run cold. I know about the house. For a moment I couldn't speak. The walls around me felt closer, the silence heavier. Her voice in my ear sounded like it came from another world. A world where people already knew what I was only just uncovering. I swallowed hard. What do you mean you know about the house? There was a pause, then a quiet sigh. I didn't want to call you this soon, she said. But after the lawyer mentioned it was given to you, I knew it was only a matter of time before you went there. Her words confirmed what I dreaded most. She wasn't surprised. She had expected this. How long have you known? I asked, my voice low but sharp as glass. About 5 years, she said softly. I didn't know everything, but I knew enough. I closed my eyes and let my head rest lightly against the wall. 5 years. 5 years she had known my husband was living a double life, and she never said a word. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, letting the anger seep through. Helena, she said gently. I didn't know how. He swore it would end. He said he was going to make a decision and that he just needed time. He promised he wouldn't hurt you. I let out a bitter laugh. He didn't just hurt me. He erased me. She was quiet for a long moment before speaking again. Can we meet? Please. There's more I need to tell you. Things that didn't start the way you think they did. I looked around the room at the boxes, at the secrets stacked in silence. Did you know about the child? I asked. Mara's voice softened. Yes. The answer was a blade. She continued before I could respond. But I never met him. Or her. I didn't know the details. Christopher kept everything separate. He said it was complicated, that he was dealing with it. He wasn't dealing with it, I snapped. He was living it. I know, she whispered. And I'm sorry. I truly am. I didn't know if her apology meant anything anymore. But there was something in her tone. Something careful, something burdened by its own pain. Where do you want to meet? Your place, she said. Tonight, if you're willing. I took a breath, steady but thin. Fine. When I hung up, the silence of the house felt different. Less like a museum, more like a crime scene. I placed the bracelet back in the box, closed the lid, and looked around one last time before leaving the room. As I walked through the hallway, my eyes caught something near the bottom of a coat rack by the door. A small backpack, blue with a cartoon fox on the front. I crouched and opened it slowly. Inside were crayons, a small notebook with scribbles, and a pair of socks with tiny stars on them. He brought the child here often. Not occasionally, frequently. This wasn't a hidden escape. This was a second home. I stood, swallowing the bitterness that rose like bile, and pulled the envelope from my coat pocket. The one he wrote to me. I stared at it, then forced myself to tuck it away again. Not here. Not in this house. I would open it when I was ready, or when anger no longer outweighed grief. On my way out, I made sure every light was off, every door locked behind me. The key felt heavier now, as if it carried ghosts on its teeth. When I got back to my car, the sky had begun to darken, the early stretch of evening pulling shadows across the ground. I sat for a moment without starting the engine. My reflection in the rearview mirror didn't look like me. Eyes hollow, lips pale, hair clinging to the sides of my face. I didn't recognize the woman staring back. I drove home in silence, my hands tight around the wheel. Every mile between the house and my own felt like a road between two versions of myself, who I thought I was and who I had been turned into. By the time I reached the driveway, the first edge of night had settled in. The porch light glowed faintly, and for a heartbeat, I wished he would walk through the door and tell me everything was a misunderstanding. That there was no other woman, no child, no life built on lies. But the truth was louder now than hope. I went inside and placed my coat over the back of a chair. The envelope in the pocket pressed against the fabric like something alive. I didn't touch it. I made tea I didn't drink. I sat on the couch. I waited. When the doorbell finally rang, I didn't move right away. The sound was soft but final, like the closing of a chapter one never agreed to write. I stood, walked slowly to the door and opened it. Mara stood there, her eyes filled with something I couldn't name. Sorrow, maybe, or regret, or fear of the words she was about to speak. She stepped inside without us needing to pretend this was an ordinary visit. "Helena," she said quietly, "before you hate me for everything I didn't say, you need to know how it really started." I closed the door behind her, my breath steady but cold. "Then tell me," I said. "All of it." Mara sat on the edge of the armchair like someone unsure if they deserved the furniture beneath them. I stayed standing for a moment, arms folded, watching her with the kind of calm that comes only after your world has already cracked. She looked older than I remembered, tired in the way people get when they've carried something too heavy for too long. "I don't know where to start," she said quietly. "Start with the truth," I replied, my voice even. "Something my husband couldn't manage." She flinched but didn't argue. He didn't meet her because he was cheating. It didn't begin that way. I raised an eyebrow. "Is that supposed to make this easier?" "No," she said, shaking her head. "But you deserve the full story." She took a slow breath. "About 7 years ago, Christopher had an accident. You remember the business trip, when he was gone for 2 weeks instead of 1. I nodded stiffly. He told me a client's contract was delayed and he had to stay longer. I thought nothing of it. I trusted him then. He was driving back late from a meeting and hit a patch of black ice," Mara continued. "His car spun out. He wasn't badly injured, but another car was involved. I felt a faint chill at the back of my neck." "Whose car?" "Elizabeth's," she said softly. "She was driving alone. Her car went off the road and into a ditch. He called for help, stayed with her until the ambulance came. He visited her in the hospital later to apologize again. That's how they met." I paced slowly, the floor soft under my steps. "So it started with guilt." Mara nodded. "Yes. First, that's all it was. He paid some of her medical expenses anonymously. He felt responsible. Then he kept visiting. They became friends." I looked at her sharply. "He was married." "He told her that," Mara said quickly. "From the beginning. She knew he had a wife." The words tasted bitter. "Did she care?" "I think she believed him when he said he'd leave," Mara said quietly. "He told her his marriage was falling apart, that he was staying out of obligation. It was strange how betrayal didn't always come like fire. Sometimes it came like a dull, twisting knife of disappointment." "And did you believe him too?" "No," she said, meeting my eyes. "I told him he was wrong. I told him to stop before it went too far. But he was already in too deep." I sat down slowly, my body tired from holding itself upright against everything. "When did the baby come?" "Oliver was born a little over 4 years ago," Mara replied. "Christopher didn't know she was pregnant until after it happened. She had cut contact for a while because she wanted to move on. She thought he'd never keep his promises. But he went back," I said bitterly. "He always went back," she replied. "To both of you." I closed my eyes for a moment. "Did he ever plan to tell me?" "I think he wanted to," she said quietly. "But he was afraid. Every time he tried to end things with her, he ended up staying longer. And every time he came home to you, he said he couldn't leave you either." I looked at her sharply. "So he kept 2 lives, 2 houses, 2 families." Mara's voice thinned. "He bought that house after Oliver was born. He didn't want the boy to grow up without a father. But he never intended to lose you." I let out a hollow laugh. "He didn't lose me. He threw me away in pieces." She bowed her head. "I'm not asking you to forgive him. I wouldn't if I were you." Silence settled between us for a moment, thick and uncertain. "Does she know he's dead?" I asked finally. Mara hesitated. "No. Not yet." The words felt surreal. "Why? Why hasn't she come looking? Why didn't she show up at the funeral?" "Because she doesn't live here anymore," Mara said. "She left the city 6 months ago. Christopher still visited, but he stopped telling me when. I only know bits of it from what he mentioned in passing." "And the house?" I asked. "He visited alone sometimes, and sometimes with Oliver when she came to town. But she doesn't know he left it to you." I rested my elbows on my knees, my hands clasped together. She'll find out. Yes, Mara said quietly. And soon. Especially if you open that letter. My eyes drifted to the coat where the envelope still lay in the pocket. You know what's in it? No, she said. But I know he wrote more than one. One for you. One for her. Maybe one for Oliver when he's older. A tired ache settled in my chest. Do you know where they are now? Her and the boy. Mara hesitated. He mentioned a town by the coast. He didn't give details. But I might know someone who can find out. I looked at her. Why are you helping me? She took a long breath, her eyes glistening with something unspoken. Because you're the only one who doesn't know you were part of a lie. And because whether you believe it or not, he did love you. He just didn't know how to stop destroying the things he loved. I didn't answer. Love wasn't a justification. It wasn't even a comfort. It was just another wound with a pretty name. Finally I spoke. I'm going back to that house tomorrow. Mara nodded slowly. If you do, be prepared. There may be more than photographs and toys waiting for you. I met her gaze. I'm not afraid of the truth anymore. But that wasn't entirely true. I was afraid of what the truth would make me become. After Mara left, the silence in my home felt different. Less like emptiness and more like a bruise someone kept pressing. I didn't cry. I hadn't cried since the funeral, and even then I wasn't sure if I was grieving him or the idea of him. I went to the bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed, and finally pulled the envelope from my coat. For a moment I just held it against my palm, feeling the smooth paper, the shape of his handwriting beneath my fingers. My name looked wrong now, written by a man I only half knew. I considered ripping it open. I considered burning it instead. In the end I placed it on the nightstand unopened. I wasn't ready to hear his voice even in ink. Sleep came late and shallow, full of images I couldn't sort into memory or imagination. I woke before the sun, as if my body knew I had work to do. I dressed in silence and didn't bother with makeup. There was no one left to perform for. Driving back to the house felt different this time. The first time I went as a widow chasing a mystery. This time, I went as someone who had been quietly rewritten by someone else's secrets. The key was cold in my hand when I unlocked the front door. The air inside held that same faint scent, clean linen, wood polish, the trace of a child's shampoo. I found myself listening for sounds I knew wouldn't come. Footsteps, laughter, the quiet hum of a life I had no part in. I walked straight to the office where I'd found the envelope the day before. The desk was still open, the photograph still lying where I left it. Christopher's face in that picture felt foreign to me now. I put it face down. I didn't know exactly what I was searching for, only that there was more. Lies didn't begin and end with photographs and toys. I opened drawers carefully, one at a time. In the bottom drawer, tucked beneath old receipts and loose pens, I found another envelope. This one wasn't sealed. Inside were documents, bank statements, a second phone contract, insurance forms, all tied to this address. All maintained behind my back. He had been meticulous. Intentional. That realization felt like betrayal wrapped in precision. In the drawer above it I found something stranger. A ring box. For a few seconds my breath caught. I opened it slowly. Inside was a simple silver ring. Not flashy. Not new. Worn at the edges like it had been touched often. It wasn't mine. He'd never shown it to me. I didn't know if it was meant for her, or if it already belonged to someone. I placed the box back exactly where I found it and stood, feeling my pulse in my throat. In the hallway, the backward photographs were still turned around, the ones I hadn't touched. I hesitated, then began flipping the remaining frames one by one. One held a picture of Oliver standing beside a woman I didn't recognize, an older woman with silver hair and eyes too much like his. He looked comfortable with her, the way children do with someone who belongs to them. A grandmother, maybe. His grandmother. In another photo, I saw Elizabeth pregnant, sitting on the porch steps. Christopher was kneeling beside her, one hand resting gently on her stomach. The tenderness on his face felt like a slap. He had lived a lifetime in the shadows of mine. My thoughts were interrupted by a soft creak from upstairs. I froze. The house had been silent since I entered. I hadn't imagined it. I heard it again, a faint shift of floorboards. Someone was here. I moved toward the staircase, my heartbeat thudding in my chest. Each step was deliberate, quiet. When I reached the landing, I saw that one of the bedroom doors was half open. It hadn't been yesterday. I hesitated at the doorway, then pushed it open with the tips of my fingers. The room was a child's bedroom, small, bright, with walls painted a pale blue. Toys lay scattered in a corner. A blanket crumpled on the small bed. But it wasn't empty. A woman stood by the window, her back to me. She didn't startle when I entered. She must have heard me coming up the stairs. Her reflection in the glass showed only half her face, but it was enough for me to recognize her. Elizabeth. She turned slowly, and for a moment we just stared at each other. There was no panic in her eyes, no guilt, only a quiet steadiness that unsettled me. "You're her," she said softly. "His wife." The words landed without accusation, but they still made my throat tighten. "How did you get in?" She held up a small key between two fingers. "He gave me one. Years ago." Her voice wasn't shaking. Mine wasn't either, though everything inside me was. I stepped into the room fully, closing the door behind me. "Why are you here?" She lowered the key, her fingers curling around it. "Because I found out he was dead. And I needed to see for myself what he left behind." The honesty in her tone made the room feel even smaller. I looked at her, really looked at her. She wasn't beautiful in a threatening way. She wasn't dressed like someone who came to fight. She looked tired. Like me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she asked something I didn't expect. "Did he ever tell you about me?" I let out a slow, cold breath. "No. He told me nothing." She nodded once, as if that confirmed something she already suspected. Her eyes drifted to the hallway behind me. "You shouldn't have had to find out this way," she said quietly. I felt something sharp rise in my chest. Anger, grief, disbelief. And how should I have found out? Her voice didn't waver. "From him. Not from a locked door and a stack of secrets." For the first time, I realized she might be grieving a man I didn't know at all. We stood in the quiet of that small blue room, the weight of two different lives pressing in from every wall. I couldn't decide if I hated her, pitied her, or saw too much of myself in her. She didn't look away, and neither did I. "I thought you might come here," she said, her voice even but soft. "When I didn't see your car before, I waited down the street. I came in after you left yesterday." So she had already seen the house alive with my shock. That unsettled me more than I let show. "You followed me?" She shook her head. "No. I just knew eventually you'd open that door. The lawyer contacted me too. He said the property wasn't mentioned in the will the way I expected." I narrowed my eyes. "You expected him to leave it to you?" She exhaled slowly, not offended. "I thought he might. Or at least that he had made some plan for Oliver." The child's name out loud made something twist inside me. "Where is he?" I asked. "With my mother," she said quietly. "I didn't want him here today. I came alone for a reason." I glanced at the toys, at the unmade bed. "You've been here before since he died." "A few times," she admitted. "I kept expecting him to walk through the door. I still can't believe he won't." Grief sat in her words, unfamiliar in shape but unmistakable. She crossed her arms, not defensively. More like she was holding herself together. "You said he told you about me," I said. "From the beginning." She nodded once. "He told me he was married. He told me your name. But he also told me he was going to end things with you. He said he just needed time." The familiarity of those words made me want to laugh and scream at the same time. "He told me we weren't ready for children. That work was too demanding. That stability was coming eventually." She looked down, guilt flickering across her face. "I asked him more than once why he didn't leave you. Every time he said the same thing. You didn't deserve to be blindsided. He said he had to do it the right way." I stared at her. There is no right way to lie to two women for years. She looked like she wanted to argue, then didn't. "I know that now." I moved farther into the room and sat on the edge of the bed. She stayed by the window. "Why didn't you tell me when you found out he died?" I asked. She hesitated. "I didn't think it was my place. And I didn't know what you knew. I assumed you might already hate me without knowing who I was." I didn't respond to that. The air between us was tight but controlled. "Did you love him?" I asked the question, surprising even me. She met my eyes. Yes. There was no hesitation. No shame. That honesty was like a slap and a strange relief. Did he love you? Her voice thinned. I believed he did. Even when I wished I didn't. I swallowed back the sting in my throat. He told you he was going to leave me? She nodded. He said he'd tried. That he couldn't stand hurting you any longer. But every time he came close, something held him back. Guilt, fear, history, I don't know. My hands curled around the blanket on the bed. He stayed with me. He made vows to me. And while I was sleeping beside him, he was building birthdays and breakfasts and bedtime stories with you. Her jaw tensed, but she didn't look away. I never asked him to lie to you. I asked him to choose. He just never did. Silence stretched for a moment, filled with shared betrayal, though not shared blame. Finally I spoke again, quieter. What now? She looked around the room, then back at me. I came today to collect a few things, Oliver's clothes, some of his toys. I didn't take anything before because I didn't want to cross whatever line was left between us. So now there are no lines, I said flatly. She nodded. You own the house. I'm not here to fight for it. Or for anything else. I just need a few pieces of my son's life. A part of me expected anger to rise again, but what came instead was exhaustion. A slow sinking kind. Take what you came for. She blinked, surprised. Are you sure? I gestured vaguely. It's not mine. None of this ever was. She stepped toward the small dresser and began opening drawers carefully, as if afraid to disturb ghosts. I watched her pull out tiny shirts, socks, a stuffed rabbit worn at the edges. Her movements were tender, deliberate. Did he ever mention writing letters? I asked suddenly. She paused, then nodded once. Before his last trip to see us, he said if something ever happened, there were things we both deserved to know. My heart pounded once, heavy. He left me one. She didn't ask if I'd read it. He probably left one for me too. But I haven't received anything. I thought of the documents I'd found, the ways he separated and controlled every truth. Maybe he didn't finish them, I said. Or maybe he was still trying to decide who he was when he wrote them. She folded a shirt and placed it gently in a canvas bag. Or maybe he thought he still had time. Time. The one thing he spent recklessly on all the wrong things. As she gathered the last of the clothes, she turned to me one more time. I won't come back here again. Once I leave today, it's yours to keep or destroy. I stood, the floor solid under my feet for the first time that morning. What happens when Oliver asks about his father? She held my gaze. I'll tell him the truth. Just not all at once. The truth. The hardest inheritance of all. Neither of us said goodbye. She walked past me and down the stairs, her footsteps quiet but certain. I stayed in the doorway of the small blue room until I heard the front door close. For a long moment, the house felt impossibly silent. Then I realized something terrifying and liberating at once. For the first time since stepping over the threshold, I was alone in his secrets. I stayed in that room long after she left, staring at the empty space where the small bag of clothes had been. The walls, the scattered toys, the softness of the blanket beneath my hand. It was all proof of a world he built without permission or confession. I didn't know whether to scream, cry, or laugh at the sick absurdity of it all. Eventually, I forced myself to move. The house felt colder now, as if someone had opened a window I couldn't see. I walked down the stairs slowly, noticing every creak in the steps, the way shadows lingered in corners. At the bottom of the staircase, I stopped and looked at the photographs I had turned face up yesterday. Their smiles felt like accusations. I needed to see the rest of the house. Not just the visible parts, the hidden ones too. The places people don't go unless they live somewhere long enough to claim it. I started with the kitchen, opening every drawer and cabinet. Inside one, behind pots and mismatched lids, I found a tin box. I pulled it out and set it on the counter. The lid creaked when I opened it. Inside were receipts, ticket stubs, scraps of paper with handwriting I recognized and wished I didn't. There were drawings too, stick figures holding hands, a sun with too many rays, the name Daddy scrawled in red marker. I ran a finger over a train ticket dated 3 years ago. The destination was a town by the coast, the same place Mara mentioned. He had traveled not for work, but for birthdays and beach visits and grocery runs in lives I never touched. Beneath the papers was a folded sheet of notebook paper. I opened it slowly, bracing myself. It was a list written by him in his neat, decisive handwriting. On the left side, 2 columns of initials ER and EH. Elizabeth Rose and Helena Hayes, her and me. Beneath each were notes, dates, gift ideas, appointment reminders. Things a man might write if he were trying to keep 2 stories straight without letting them collide. I felt sick. I put everything back in the box and closed the lid, pressing my palm flat against the top until my hand steadied. I went next to the small laundry room off the side of the kitchen. I opened the cabinets above the washer. More clothes that didn't belong to me. A jacket that might have been hers. A child's raincoat with a yellow duck on the chest. I folded it carefully and put it back where it was. Then I saw the door to the basement. It was half hidden behind a hanging coat and a vacuum cleaner. Somehow, I knew before I even opened it that I hadn't yet seen the worst of it. The door groaned when I pulled it open. The air that drifted up was cool and slightly damp. I flipped the light switch and descended slowly. The wooden steps creaked under my weight, each one a small confession of how deeply this place had been lived in. The basement was larger than I expected. There were shelves against the walls, filled with boxes and storage bins. The kind of things a family keeps over years. Holiday decorations, winter clothes, tools, old baby items. Except none of these were mine. I moved from one box to the next, opening each like I was peeling back layers of someone else's skin. In one I found Christmas ornaments, hand-painted, some with names written in childish letters. In another, a folded stroller lightly worn. A box of children's books sat on top of a plastic bin filled with maternity clothes. There were board games, puzzles with missing pieces, a faded blanket with cartoon bears on it. And then near the back of the room something caught my eye. A locked trunk beneath a workbench. It was wooden and old, the kind of trunk people inherit or hide things in. I knelt in front of it and tested the latch. Locked. I searched the drawers of the workbench and found a small tin with screws, keys, and odd bits of metal. One key was older than the rest, brass, worn at the edges. My hand shook as I tried it in the lock. Clicked open. I lifted the lid slowly. Inside was a stack of letters tied with string, all addressed to one of us. Some to me, some to her, some simply marked for when he's older. I couldn't bring myself to read any of them yet. Beneath the letters were documents. His handwriting again, but this time in long, deliberate paragraphs. It looked like a journal, or something close to it. The top page began with a date from 6 years ago. I didn't read further. I placed everything exactly as I found it and stood in silence, my heart pounding in my ears. I realized something then. Something that landed not like a blow, but like a slow, cold understanding settling into bone. The house wasn't just a secret. It was his confession, unfinished, unanswered, and now left for me to inherit. And somewhere in the stack of letters I hadn't read, in the journal I hadn't touched, in the envelope still unopened at home, he had written the truth he never spoke. I just didn't know yet if I wanted to hear it. I stood there in that basement surrounded by the echoes of a life I never lived, a life he built like a second skin around his first. The silence wasn't empty, it was crowded with every word he never said to me, every moment he spent somewhere else while telling me he was busy at work, tired, distracted, stressed. I looked at the trunk again, at the letters bound in string. I didn't know if reading them would break me further, or finally set something right inside me. I closed the lid gently and locked it again, not because I was afraid of the truth, but because I knew once I opened those letters, nothing would remain unanswered. And part of me needed a few more breaths before facing the final confessions of a man I'd buried twice, once in the ground and once in my trust. I left the basement and walked through the house one last time. The living room, the kitchen, the hallway of photographs, the small bedroom upstairs. Each held a shadow of something I couldn't unsee, but also a clarity I hadn't expected to feel. Truth, even when ugly, is still cleaner than the lies that cover it. As I reached the front door, I paused and looked around. Not as the wife left behind, but as the woman who had finally stepped into the center of her own narrative. For a moment I placed my hand flat against the wall, imagining him here. Moving through rooms I never knew, holding a child I never met, loving 2 lives and belonging to neither fully. Then I stepped outside and locked the door behind me. The sky was overcast, the air still. I stood by my car for a while, breathing, my hands wrapped tightly around the keys. My reflection in the window looked calmer than before, but not softer. Something in my eyes had hardened, not into bitterness but into certainty. When I got home, I didn't turn on any lights. I walked straight to the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed. The envelope still lay on the nightstand where I left it. My name on the front seemed smaller now, as if it had shrunk under the weight of the truth. Picked it up. For a moment I held it to my chest, not out of affection but acknowledgement. This was his last chance to speak to me, and my last chance to decide whether I would let his words reach whatever part of me still listened. I opened it slowly. The letter was handwritten, dated 2 months before he died. Helena, if you're reading this, I didn't find the courage to tell you myself. I'm not writing this to ask your forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. I'm writing because I owe you the truth before anyone else tells it their way. My eyes moved down the page, breath shaky but steady enough to go on. I have a son. His name is Oliver. You don't know him, and that's my fault. I thought I could protect you from the pain of the truth, but I only delayed it and made it worse. I loved him from the moment I knew he existed. I love you too. And I know now that trying to keep both parts of my life alive has broken them both. I paused, closing my eyes briefly before continuing. Elizabeth didn't steal me from you, and you didn't steal my future from her. I stole the truth from both of you. I wanted to fix everything before you found out, but time has a way of making thieves out of liars. I bought that house because I thought it would give me a place to be a father without destroying the marriage I had already destroyed in silence. A tear slipped down my cheek, not out of softness, but from the strain of holding two realities at once. I don't know what you will do with the house, or with my memory. I have written letters for her, for our son, and for you. I hope someday you read them, though I know I have no right to ask anything more of your heart. If I could start over, I would choose honesty, even if it meant losing one of the lives I clung to. But I didn't, and now you will have to carry what I should have. I am so sorry. Not in the way people say when they get caught. I'm sorry in the way a man is when he realizes too late that love without truth is just a performance. Whatever you decide, I will have to accept it in silence. I never stopped loving you. I just stopped deserving you. Christopher, I read the letter twice. Not because the words changed, but because I did. I folded it carefully and placed it back in the envelope. Then I stood and walked to the window. The world outside looked the same as it always had, but nothing in it felt familiar anymore. For the first time since he died, I understood something simple and heavy. I wasn't the widow of one man. I was the survivor of two versions of him. And now, for the first time in years, I was free to choose a version of myself that did not include either. I placed the envelope in a drawer, not to hide it but to close it. Then I sat down at my desk, pulled out a blank sheet of paper, and wrote the first sentence of the rest of my life. Not about him. About me. And this time there would be no locked doors. So tell me, did you enjoy my story? And from which city in the world are you listening? Please write your name and city in the comments. I would truly love to read them. If this story touched your heart, even a small thanks from you would mean the world to me. Your love and support give me the strength to keep creating more stories for you. And I'll be eagerly waiting for your feedback. You can also see 2 new life stories on your screen right now, and I'd love for you to watch those as well. And since this is my new channel, please don't forget to like the video and subscribe. Your one like and subscribe really matters to me. I'll meet you again in the next life story, with lots of love and respect.